In the spring of 1944, Adolf Hitler was waiting for an invasion he believed would decide the fate of Europe. Along the northern coast of France, thousands of German soldiers stood ready behind concrete bunkers, artillery batteries, and reinforced machine gun nests. The Atlantic Wall stretched for miles, a fortress built to crush any Allied force daring to step onto continental soil. Hitler was certain the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. It was the obvious choice, the shortest distance, the most logical landing site. And because it was so obvious, he believed he understood his enemy. What he did not understand was that the greatest weapon the Allies were about to use was not a bomb, a tank, or a battleship. It was deception. WWII 1944. The war in Europe had become a brutal machine grinding nations into dust. The Soviet Union was pushing from the east, absorbing unimaginable casualties while forcing the German army backward inch by inch. In the West, Britain had survived the Blitz, and American industry was producing ships, aircraft, and weapons at a pace the world had never seen. The Allies knew that to defeat Nazi Germany, they would have to invade Western Europe directly. That invasion was being planned under the codename Operation Overlord. But Overlord had a problem. If the Germans knew where the invasion would land, they could concentrate their armored divisions and push the Allies back into the sea within hours. A failed invasion would not just cost tens of thousands of lives. It could prolong the war for years. The solution was audacious. If the Germans expected an invasion at Pas-de-Calais, then the Allies would give them one. Or rather, they would give them the illusion of one. Thus began Operation Fortitude, one of the most elaborate military deceptions in history. The goal was simple: convince Hitler that the real invasion would occur somewhere other than Normandy. But achieving that illusion required a performance so convincing that even the most suspicious minds in Berlin would believe it. The Allies began constructing an army that did not exist. It was called the 1st United States Army Group, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton. Patton was chosen carefully. The Germans respected and feared him. They considered him the Allies' most aggressive and capable battlefield commander. If Patton was leading an army in southeast England, then surely that army must be preparing for the main attack. And so, in fields across England, something extraordinary began to appear. From the air, it looked like thousands of tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were gathering for an invasion. Supply depots seemed active. Airfields appeared crowded with aircraft. Camps buzzed with movement. But much of it was fake. Inflatable rubber tanks were positioned carefully in open fields. Wooden aircraft frames were arranged to resemble fighter squadrons. Fake landing craft made of plywood sat in harbors. Even dummy fuel depots were constructed to simulate logistical preparation. From reconnaissance photographs taken by German aircraft, everything appeared real. Shadows fell convincingly. Shapes matched expectations. The illusion was meticulous, yet visual deception was only one layer. The Allies understood that Hitler relied heavily on signals intelligence. So they flooded German listening posts with radio traffic from units that did not exist. Operators transmitted messages day and night, simulating an entire army corps. Logistics requests, movement orders, coded chatter, everything an actual army would generate. To the Germans monitoring the airwaves, the buildup at Pas-de-Calais seemed undeniable. But perhaps the most critical element of Operation Fortitude was human intelligence. The British had quietly captured and turned nearly every German spy operating in the United Kingdom. Instead of executing them, they offered a choice: cooperate or face death. Many chose to cooperate. These double agents then fed carefully crafted information back to Berlin. They confirmed the existence of Patton's Phantom Army. They reported troop concentrations. They reinforced the lie again and again until it became accepted as fact. Among these agents was one codenamed Garbo, a Spaniard who constructed an entirely fictional network of sub-agents across Britain. Through detailed, believable reports, he gained the trust of German intelligence. When he told them that the main Allied invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, they believed him. Even more astonishingly, he continued to send updates during the real invasion of Normandy, insisting that the landings there were merely a diversion. As June 1944 approached, tension gripped both sides of the channel. The Allied invasion fleet assembled in secrecy. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers prepared to cross into hostile territory. Weather delays nearly canceled the operation. But while Allied commanders agonized over timing, German leadership remained fixated on Pas-de-Calais. Hitler himself was convinced that Normandy, if attacked, would be a feint that on June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history began. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy under withering fire. Casualties mounted quickly, especially on Omaha Beach. The success of the invasion hung by a thread. If German panzer divisions had been released immediately and concentrated against the beachheads, the outcome might have been catastrophic, but they were not released. Many armored units remained stationed near Pas-de-Calais, waiting for the real invasion. German commanders hesitated. Some believed Normandy might indeed be the main assault, but Hitler's conviction overruled them. He refused to commit key reserves, convinced that a second, larger attack would come elsewhere. Hours turned into days. Days turned into weeks. By the time the Germans realized Normandy was not a diversion, the Allies had secured their foothold. Operation Fortitude did not end on D-Day. The deception continued long after the landings. False radio traffic persisted. Double agents maintained the narrative that another invasion was imminent. Hitler kept divisions in the north far longer than he should have. Those divisions never reinforced Normandy in time to push the Allies back. The consequences were immense. The success of D-Day allowed the liberation of France. It opened the Western Front fully. It accelerated the collapse of Nazi Germany. And it did so not merely through firepower, but through illusion. What makes Operation Fortitude extraordinary is not simply that it worked. It is that it exploited the psychology of an enemy leader. Hitler's strategic rigidity, his belief in his own instincts, became vulnerabilities. He saw what he expected to see. He trusted intelligence that confirmed his assumptions. The Allies understood that deception is most powerful when it aligns with the enemy's expectations. Inflatable tanks did not defeat Germany. Fake radio messages did not storm the beaches, but they created hesitation at the exact moment when hesitation meant survival. Thousands of lives were saved because armored divisions never moved. A war was shortened because one man waited for an army that never came. In the end, Operation Fortitude stands as one of the greatest deceptions in military history. It reminds us that warfare is not only fought with weapons, but with perception. The battlefield extends beyond land and sea into the mind of the enemy. And in 1944, the United States and its allies mastered that battlefield with remarkable precision. Hitler believed he was preparing for the decisive confrontation that would repel the Allies back into the ocean. Instead, he was preparing for a ghost. While he waited at Pas-de-Calais, the real invasion carved a path through Normandy. While he hesitated, the tide of war turned irreversibly against him. And by the time the truth became undeniable, it was already too late. And by the time the truth became undeniable, it was already too late. But what makes Operation Fortitude even more extraordinary is what happened inside the German command structure in the weeks that followed. Doubt began to spread among field commanders. Reports from Normandy grew more alarming. Allied forces were not retreating. They were expanding. Beachheads were turning into fortified supply zones. Air superiority was overwhelming. Yet Hitler refused to fully commit his northern reserves. He remained convinced that the true invasion was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. The deception had burrowed so deeply into his strategic thinking that even mounting evidence could not uproot it, German generals argued. Some insisted that Normandy was clearly the main assault. Others feared disobeying direct expectations from the Führer. The paralysis that followed was not caused by lack of manpower, nor by lack of weaponry, but by uncertainty. And uncertainty in war is often deadlier than bullets. Every hour that passed allowed the Allies to unload more men, more tanks, more artillery. Temporary beachheads became permanent footholds. Makeshift harbors known as mulberries were assembled off the coast, enabling a logistical miracle that stunned even experienced commanders. Meanwhile, the Phantom Army under Patton continued its silent performance. Radio traffic persisted. Double agents reinforced the narrative that a massive second wave was preparing to strike elsewhere. German reconnaissance flights reported suspicious activity in southeast England. Inflatable tanks still cast convincing shadows. Dummy aircraft still lined fake airfields. The illusion held by mid-June. The strategic balance had shifted irreversibly. Allied forces pushed inland from Normandy, linking beaches together into a unified front. German reinforcements arrived too slowly and too scattered to repel them. The hesitation born from deception had fractured their defensive response. What should have been a concentrated counterattack became fragmented resistance. Operation Fortitude did not win the war alone. Soldiers still fought and died in brutal numbers. The hedgerows of Normandy became killing fields. Cities were reduced to rubble. But deception had purchased something priceless: time. Time for reinforcements. Time for organization. Time for momentum. And momentum in warfare is a force of its WWII summer advanced. Allied troops broke through German lines in Operation Cobra. Once the breakout began, the German army in France started to collapse. Paris would be liberated by August. The Western Front was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality driving straight toward Germany's borders. Historians would later analyze Operation Fortitude as a masterpiece of coordinated intelligence. It combined physical deception, electronic manipulation, psychological profiling, and double-agent networks into a single unified strategy. Rarely in military history had so many moving pieces aligned so perfectly. It required absolute secrecy, disciplined execution, and an understanding of the enemy's mindset at the highest level. What makes it even more remarkable is that the deception did not rely on technological superiority alone. It relied on understanding human nature. Hitler's belief in his own strategic instincts made him resistant to contradictory evidence. His fixation on Pas-de-Calais became a blind spot. The Allies did not force him into a mistake. They allowed him to walk into one willingly. Even after Normandy was secure, German forces remained positioned in the north for weeks, guarding against an invasion that would never come. Entire divisions, tanks, artillery batteries, all immobilized by fear of a ghost army. Resources that could have slowed the Allied advance were frozen in place because the illusion remained convincing. The success of the deception reshaped military doctrine for generations. Modern warfare now recognizes information as a battlefield equal to land, sea, air, and space. Operation Fortitude proved that controlling what the enemy believes can be as powerful as controlling territory. It demonstrated that perception shapes action, and action determines fate. That be why the time Allied forces crossed into Germany in 1945, the outcome of the war was no longer in question. Nazi Germany would fall. Hitler would retreat into his bunker. The Third Reich would collapse under the weight of overwhelming pressure from east and west. But among the countless battles, bombings, and offensives that defined the final year of the war, one silent victory stands apart: an army that never existed. Inflatable tanks that never fired a shot. Radio operators sending messages from units that were nothing more than names on paper, and a dictator waiting for an invasion that would never arrive. Operation Fortitude reminds us that wars are not only won by strength, but by strategy. Not only by courage, but by calculation. Thousands of young men stormed the beaches of Normandy with unimaginable bravery. But behind them stood planners who understood that victory begins long before the first bullet is fired. The deception worked because it was layered, patient, and relentless. It did not rely on a single lie, but on an ecosystem of lies supporting one another. Visual illusions reinforced radio chatter. Radio chatter reinforced agent reports. Agent reports reinforced pre-existing German expectations. It was not a trick. It was an environment carefully constructed to feel real. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all. In war, reality is fragile. What commanders believe shapes what armies do. And in 1944, belief became the Allies' most powerful weapon. Hitler prepared for a decisive confrontation at Pas-de-Calais. He fortified it. He waited for it. He trusted that his understanding of strategy would prevail. Instead, history moved past him while he watched the wrong horizon. The greatest deception of World War II did not merely confuse the enemy. It altered the rhythm of history. It shortened a global conflict. It saved countless lives. And it proved that sometimes the most powerful force on a battlefield is not firepower, but imagination guided by intelligence. The army Hitler feared never came, but the one he underestimated changed the world forever.